711 AD, history says that the black man invaded the white man's personal space. Now, when you move into a person's personal space, you move into what we could call the red zone, or the code red zone. Not at the point that you're touching them, but when you move past that invisible sphere around each person, and you move into that personal area, you've moved into the red zone. And if you continue to move in that direction, eventually you'll be touching that person. Now, I'm not speaking of in terms of just a crowded place, or something like that, where it's just real busy. Like when I was in Chicago, and we were staying at the embassy, and we were downtown shopping, Chi-Town. It's very, very busy. Only other place that I've been to that Chi-Town came close to was New York City. I mean, it's like shoulder to shoulder sometimes. And it was very busy. And so you kind of have some leeway on a person being in your personal space, but nevertheless, once a person moves into that personal space, you have to pay close attention to them, and you have to be on guard. Well, history says that the black man, under the title of Moor, the Moors, once invaded the white man's personal space. That's why I say invaded his space, because when you invade, it's not because you're welcome. In 711 AD, the black man invaded the white man's personal space. But when the black man came in to Español in 711 AD, the white man and woman was hanging off a cliff. And in order to help someone in that predicament, you have to invade their personal space in order to grab their hand, their arm, and pull them up. Now, the key is that whenever you have ignorance festering in your general citizenry of any society, that is the precursor to destruction, self-destruction. When you don't educate your general citizenry, then you have no posterity and upon which you can pass a baton on to, giving opportunity for potential genius, invention, and all the things that come from gaining from the intellect of your general citizenry. When you keep the masses of your people ignorant, you leave them hanging off a cliff, and ultimately yourself, your entire nation. A wise businessman does not seek to run the business himself, unless he's just that passionate about it. But a business owner, not a self-employed person, is a person who uses the gifts and talents of the people around him to catapult him to great heights. And in the process, he puts them in a better position than hanging off a cliff. But you got to educate people in order to do that. In 711 AD, when the black man invaded the white man's personal space, 99% of the European world was in darkness, ignorant, illiterate. There were only 2 universities at that time, and the Moors, the black Moors who moved into Espanol, built 17 additional universities so a motherfucker could get an education. That's your history. So, yes, the black man moved into your personal space, invaded your personal space, but you were hanging off a cliff, and he grabbed your hand and pulled you up. And we were in that position until the 1400s, almost 800 years later, close to 1500, like 1490 something or other, 1495 or what have you, when the black Moors were overthrown and eventually sold into slavery. Those were your first slaves, were the very people that pulled you up from hanging off a cliff. Those were your first slaves, 4,000 in number. But I wanted to preface that because when you study history, whenever the European invaded somebody's personal space, whether they found them hanging off a cliff, which they never found a black race like that, or found them in established cities, they would push them off the cliff. Europeans always show black people in Africa, in these desert areas, starving, bellies out to here, flies flying all around their face, this image of Africans. What they don't teach their white kids, and what they don't teach the world, is that the reason that black people lived in the desert is because the white man came in and pushed them off a cliff. The white man destroyed the cities of the Egyptians, what you call Egyptians. They destroyed their cities when they invaded their personal space and moved them from out of their cities into the desert. That's the part they don't tell you. Black people who lived in the desert because they were fleeing the devastation of their homeland. And then that's the image that they constantly show you. What they don't teach their white kids and what they don't teach their black kids in their educational system is that respective to the mass of the continent of Africa, Africa actually has less desert than any other country in the world or continent. With respect to its land mass, Africa has less desert than any other continent in the world. Less desert. And no high culture in Africa grew up in no desert. No high culture. We moved with vegetation from one area to another. When the white man moved into what we now call America, he pushed the Native American off a cliff. When he moved in, there were an estimated 60 million Native Americans. By World War II, there were only 800,000. I don't know what you do with almost 60 million people. In terms of the destruction of such, and still claim humanity. When the European invaded Africa in 1500, there were an estimated 600 million Africans. But by 1900, 400 years later, there were only an estimated 100 million. I don't know what you do with 500 million people. Who ended up dying once you came around, and still claim your own humanity. That's bullshit. This is Warren B., author of The Science of Greatness, on Amazon.com books and Kindle books. And the question that I have for you today is, can you take Michael Jackson's anecdote for humanity? That instead of looking at someone else who's hanging off a cliff or lying at the bottom of one because of you, and then judge them because of that, can you start with the man in the mirror and examine your steps in history? History is to be learned from so that it doesn't repeat itself. Warren B., author of The Science of Greatness. Greatness spelled with $2 on Amazon.com books and Kindle books. Get a copy and look in the mirror, maybe for the first time. Peace.